Let's play Burlington's Guess That Price. Back to school means back to saving. We're bringing you kids' jeans starting at, hold on a minute, just $11.99. Burlington's acing this test. What about character backpacks? We've got them starting at $12.99. Burlington's done it again. How about sneakers for the kids? A-plus brands and right on trend starting at $11.99. Saving is now in session. Burlington, deals, brands, wow! Styles and selections vary by location.
Put us in a box. Go ahead. That just gives us something to break out of. Because the next generation 2025 GMC Terrain Elevation is raising the standard of what comes standard. As far as expectations go, why meet them when you can shatter them? What we choose to challenge, we challenge completely. We are professional grade. Visit gmc.com to learn more.
Weather forecasts for this past weekend called for another lengthy heat wave, with temperatures exceeding 100 degrees for 4 days in a row, maybe longer. I'm Elliot Njus, and this is Beat Check with The Oregonian. This won't be the Portland area's hottest stretch. That was a 2021 heat wave when temperatures hit 116 degrees. About 100 people died in Oregon. But this 2024 heat wave might end up among the longest, which weather officials say could be just as dangerous. I'm joined today by Gosia Wozniacka, the Oregonian's environmental reporter and a familiar voice to Beat Check followers. Thanks for joining me today, Gosia.
Yeah, of course. Great to be here.
So before we get into it, we should note that we're recording this on Friday, July 5th. It's the first of several days when temperatures are expected to break 3 digits. We don't know how hot it's going to get. We don't know how long it's going to last. And we don't know how dangerous this heat event is going to end up being. But we wanted to talk a little bit about why this is happening, why it's happening again very quickly, after a historic 2021 heat wave. So, Gosia, it was just 3 years ago that we had that record-setting event. It took an unthinkable toll in human lives, and it certainly feels like these kinds of events are happening more frequently. Is that true? Does that bear out in the numbers?
Yeah, it's definitely true. I think, since 2021, every year, every summer, we've seen really extreme temperatures, not as high as in 2021, but pretty high up there. So I think it's just becoming pretty much the norm in Oregon, which obviously it was not in the past. So these heat waves are becoming a lot more common. They're also becoming longer in duration, and they're getting hotter over time.
Longtime Oregonians are really used to sort of being in a place with a temperate climate, a very moderate climate. And that's certainly reflected in, across the state, the air conditioning is not always common, and it's certainly taken some getting used to. What does the science say about the role of human-caused climate change in this recent shift?
Yeah, I think, the answer to that question is pretty clear. The vast majority of scientists agree that our planet is warming, our oceans are warming, and that humans are the primary cause of that via greenhouse gases. So pretty much since the Industrial Revolution, we've been adding, more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas. These all release carbon dioxide, and it's warming our planet. So unfortunately, we are the primary cause.
And what does that say about the future frequency, the future severity of these kinds of heat events?
I mean, unfortunately, we're on a trajectory where our Earth is going to be hotter and hotter. And, obviously, our government and governments around the world are trying to change that. But the pace of that change is pretty slow. We're trying to electrify everything. We're trying to clean up our electricity sources. We're trying to burn less fossil fuels. But we're not doing that great in terms of the changes that we need to make. So it's kind of it's a big change, and it's kind of slow, and people are just used to the ways of doing things of driving their cars and taking their airplanes and, using a lot of resources. All of that burns fossil fuels and contributes to global warming.
So the 2021 heat dome event that showed us how dangerous heat can be. What are some of the risk factors that separate, just a hot day from something more serious?
Yeah, I mean, just the bottom line is that at a certain point, I think around 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the human body just loses its ability to get rid of heat, and so it doesn't function as optimally as it usually does. And once you hit like 120 degrees, it's basically the limit of, where we can function. And also complicating this is humidity. Thankfully, we live on the West Coast where it's not super humid most of the time. In areas like on the East Coast, that is a lot more dangerous because high heat plus humidity is even more dangerous. And so that those temperature levels that I just mentioned would be much, much lower when it's humid. But yeah, I mean, basically at a certain temperature, the human body just can't function anymore.
And how about the duration? The fact that this is something that's going to last several days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, heat builds up over time in our bodies, and I think a lot depends also on how cool or hot the nights are. I used to live in the Central Valley of California, and there were periods during the summer there where where it was really hot even at night. Like it just never cooled down, and so the body just never had that cool down effect. It just wasn't possible. Here in Oregon, the nights do tend to be a little cooler, but there's one caveat to that is that it kind of depends on where you live. Also, there's certain building materials that hold the heat a lot longer than others. So while some houses may cool down, you're able to open the windows and get that fresh air. Other houses, you just can't cool it down. Like it'll just be hot all night, even if you're trying to cool things down. And so that's where it can get dangerous, especially when the heat is lasting 2, 3, 4 days.
Right. So you have these long stretches of time with these very high temperatures and just no chance for the body to kind of recover, to hydrate, and that's when this starts to become really dangerous. Exactly.
And, what we mentioned at the beginning is people in Oregon are just not used to this. This is not Las Vegas. This is not Arizona. Like we think of Oregon as a temperate climate. And so people think like, oh, it's going to be okay. I'll get through this. Like it's not so bad. It won't get so bad here. Well, it does get bad here. And I think people just don't realize it. And they'll, the heat will sneak up on them. It's really dangerous.
Yeah, and not just physiologically, but our infrastructure isn't really prepared for that, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about your reporting and others have shown that the consequences of these heat events aren't sort of borne evenly over the region. Who is most at risk?
So when Multnomah County did an analysis of who are the people who are most impacted, this is what they found. They found that the majority of the people who died in the heat wave were older than 65, lived alone, and had no air conditioning. So those right there are risk factors. Many of the people who died also happened to live in public housing. So I'm going to kind of go through the several risk factors because there's several of them and they're very different. So the first one is person's health and age. So mentioned people older than 65 are at risk. Children, people with disabilities, and with certain health conditions that basically increase their vulnerability to heat. So that's sort of one vulnerable population or set of factors. The second one is environmental factors. So where do you live? Do you live in a part of town where the streets are aligned with large trees, where there's tons of shade, where your backyard has a giant tree with a big shade that shades your house, that shades your garden, where you can sit under the tree? Or do you live in an area that has dozens of apartment complexes that's pretty much paved over, that may have a few little scraggly little trees, but nothing to speak of when it comes to shade? That makes a huge difference, I think, for anybody who's out walking, when you're in the shade versus when you're out in the sun. It drastic difference. So where do you live? Second, what kind of house do you live in? So is your house old or new? Is your house renovated? Is the house envelope, is it leaky? Like are your windows, doors really old? Does air get in easily from the outside? Or is your house well constructed where it's like really tight and, there little air gets in? Like that makes a huge difference, right? If it's hot outside and your house is leaky, all that hot air is going to go inside your house. And then third, do you work outside? Are you a farm worker, construction worker, any other profession that is outdoors? That puts you obviously at big risk if you have to work during a heat wave. And then a third set of factors is financial. So no matter where you live, what can you afford? What are your financial resources? Can you afford an air conditioner? Is it just like a single little unit for one room? Is it an air conditioning system for your entire house? Can you afford to pay for utilities? Because utilities are very expensive and you're going to be running that air conditioner pretty much 24 hours a day during a heat wave. And then if you're an outdoor worker, can you afford not to work? So those are sort of financial considerations that can put you at risk.
A couple of those, a couple of the risk factors that you mentioned early on included older Oregonians and people who lived alone, and that certainly underscores something that the rest of us can do to help, is to make sure that we're checking on folks, family members or neighbors or others who, we had a story the other day about risk factors to look out for, sort of symptoms to look out for when it comes to heat exhaustion. And one thing that stuck out to me from that story was that it's really hard to recognize in yourself when you start to experience some of those, the worst symptoms of heat stroke. You also mentioned the risk to workers, people who work outside, including agricultural workers and construction workers. Oregon has introduced some new regulations around outdoor work, right? That require employers to provide water, provide breaks, provide training for those kinds of workers.
Yes. So those regulations specifically have been around, I think, since 2022, and Oregon is one of 5 states that has its own workplace standards for heat exposure. California, Colorado, Minnesota, and Washington are the other states. And in Oregon, once temperatures exceed 90 degrees, workers have to be given extra cool water, shade, extra breaks. There's some other specific rules, but those are the basic things which are super important. Obviously, if you're outside all day. So Oregon has some of the most stringent rules when it comes to heat exposure and outdoor workers. And some of these rules also apply to indoor workers. The federal government just came out with a proposal for heat exposure rules for workers nationwide, but that proposal hasn't been approved yet. So for now, Oregon's rules stand.
So if these kinds of heat events are growing more frequent, what are we as a region doing to prepare and to be more resilient, to give residents a better chance at staying healthy when these heat waves inevitably happen again?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest changes that happened is the push to get more air conditioners and heat pumps, which can also cool, into the hands of people, especially people with lower incomes who may not be able to afford those cooling systems. And so the city of Portland has a program called Cooling Portland that's financed through PSEF, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, where there are are planning to distribute 15,000 ACs and heat pumps by 2026. And then also the Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Health Plan, which is our version of Medicaid, distributes air conditioners to people who are enrolled in Medicaid in Oregon. So those two efforts have been pretty significant. And as you mentioned, a lot of people in Oregon and in the Portland area don't have ACs because we didn't really need them in the past. Portland's this program called Cooling Portland that I mentioned, in the past it was basically available through community organizations, which was a bit of a complicated process to apply for, available to folks who are 65 and older or have health conditions. And the city in mid-June, so just last month, opened it up to an easier process, basically, where you could either call 311 or fill out an online application to request a cooling unit. And just to show what the demand for these cooling units is, the day after they announced this, they had over 1,000 people calling 311 to request.
Just the day after.
Just one single day, right? And I checked with them yesterday, and they said they're processing several thousand applications right now. They've already been able to install since mid-June 800 additional units. So it sounds like they're installing them pretty quickly, or getting them into people's hands, because these are mostly like standalone units or units that you can just pop into a window. So they're not full, home cooling systems, but they can cool a room pretty well. So the demand, in other words, is huge out there. And, this is folks who are lower income who may not be able to afford these units. But yeah, there's just a lot of pent-up demand for this and a huge need for this. So it sounds like, Portland and the state are trying to get as many of these units into people's hands. But, obviously a lot more is needed than we're able to distribute right now. So.
And you mentioned, I think before we started recording, that having access to air conditioning, it wasn't necessarily something that that in the past heat wave prevented that people died, even though they had access to air conditioning. Why is that? Yeah,
so last year, there's a researcher whose name is Vivek Chandas, and he's been doing a lot of the work on heat domes and heat mapping in the Portland area. And so last year, he and his team did a study where they installed temperature sensors in public housing apartments, specifically with Home Forward. And they wanted to basically check what happens during a heat wave and whether the presence of an air conditioning or heat pump unit makes a difference. And what they found was actually quite surprising. They found that it didn't make a difference. And this is specifically for public housing that we're talking about, not regular single family homes, but for public housing. It didn't necessarily make a difference because for several reasons. One, many people didn't turn their AC unit on because, likely the cost of using the AC maybe was too much for them. Two, the building materials from which the houses that these people live in are made retain heat even at night. So, some of these public housing buildings are, these kind of large, tall towers, and they the material that they're made of, the steel, it just retains heat. So it doesn't matter if you have an AC. There's a limit to how much the AC can cool your house. And also, the third thing is that the people who had an AC didn't take any precautions. So they didn't, people who don't have an AC usually will close their windows, make sure the shades are down, maybe put a blanket, maybe have some sort of misting. People come up with all sorts of amazing creative ways to stay cool. And the people who had an AC, the researchers found that they didn't do any of those things. And so the AC just wasn't enough to keep their home cool, and they didn't do any of the other things, so their house still got pretty hot.
So it's the it sort of underscores the importance of not relying on the AC, and also the just the cost of running it for some is a deterrent, that that you're going to have to pay that bill later on.
Yeah, I think that's a deterrent to many people. But yeah, I think the biggest conclusion from this is that it really depends on your house, and how drafty it is, what the materials that your house is built from are, and I think you need to protect yourself on multiple levels. Like if it's going to be really, really hot, you have to have other methods, not just turning on the AC. And again, I'll go back to my experience living in the Central Valley of California in Fresno, which is a place that gets extremely hot. We're talking like 150 degrees or more on a regular basis during the summer. And people there who live there for a long time, or who are native to Fresno, they have these very specific routines of how they cool their homes. They have their AC, but they also, they keep their windows up at night. They close them immediately at like 7 a.m. when it starts to get warm. They put all the shades down. They put blankets down. I mean, they have like this whole thing that they do every single day, in addition to running the AC. And so I think we need to rethink how we protect ourselves and how we protect our homes, and not rely on the air conditioner or the heat pump as our sole savior, especially if, you happen to live in an older house that's leaky, in a substandard apartment housing complex, that those are super leaky also. We have many old single family houses in Portland. If you happen to have like a single unit in a room, the rest of your house is still going to be really hot. And so you need to realize that you have to do more than just use the AC. And this is, again, an issue of resources, because, if you're a very wealthy person, you can afford to have a tight, well-built house that's really well insulated, and, and you can afford to buy a full house cooling system, which is wonderful, but most people can't afford that. And so just taking these other steps, I think, to cool the house down, drawing the shades, maybe putting in blankets if you have a really super leaky house, doing other things, closing your windows when it gets hot so the air doesn't get in. That's really helpful. And also reaching out to programs that the county has, the city has, that help you weatherize your home. Those are things that people can do on their own, or sometimes an organization will come in and help you out. And that makes a huge difference when it comes to a heat wave, because that makes your house less leaky, and so less hot air is coming in.
What other efforts are underway to make the region more resilient in the heat?
Yeah, we've started opening cooling centers. Prior to the heat dome, that wasn't really something that was very common. And so now we have Multnomah County and the surrounding counties all have cooling centers. Libraries are staying open longer so that people have a place to go in, really hot, when it gets too hot, when they realize like, wow, it's just too hot in my house, I need to get out. And also people who are unhoused and living on the street, they have a place to go when it gets, too unbearably hot outdoors. One caveat too is that many residents are still not aware that cooling centers are available, and people who live in houses may not know that it's also for them. May assume that it's only for people who are houseless, but in fact, the cooling centers are open to everyone. You can call and request free transportation. You can take TriMet for free to get to a cooling center. So the county is, the county and the city are doing their best to make sure that people are able to reach cooling centers if they need to. But I think we need to do a lot more to educate people about their availability, and also, that make them, these cooling centers, welcoming places for people to come.
I understand also that there are efforts underway to sort of figure out. You mentioned earlier that geographically there are areas that are more severely affected by extreme heat, not necessarily because of the climate of that area, but because of kind of the built environment. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, I think there's multiple efforts to cool down neighborhoods that historically have received more cement, that have fewer trees. So there's for anyone who knows the city and has driven around, that there's, if you go to Rockwood, which is kind of in the border of Portland and Gresham, or if you go to, the West Hills, those are two very, very different environments. And in fact, one of the things that have resulted from the heat dome is that researchers and the counties have done extensive heat mapping, trying to figure out which parts of town, which parts of our counties are the hottest ones. And the most recent effort that happened, they just released results earlier this spring, showed that there can be a 17-degree difference between the shady, leafy, tree canopy neighborhoods and a neighborhood that has lots of cement. 17 degrees is a huge difference. So, it's pretty significant. And if you go to one of these neighborhoods that's really paved over, that's just parking lots and apartment complexes, it's so much hotter. And so there are efforts to plant trees there. We've committed a lot of money through the Clean Energy Fund and other sources, federal funding, where we're going to be planting a lot of trees. Now, trees take time to grow. And so this is a challenge because, those trees are not going to be large and tall for a few decades. This is not something that's going to make a difference very soon in people's lives, but it's something that we have to plan for because these extreme heat events, are getting hotter and more frequent. And so, we have to plan for future generations, essentially. And then, there's been efforts also to depave, to basically get rid of the cement that, makes these areas hotter. So there's, we're trying multiple solutions. None of them really are immediate. It's something that we'll have to work on for a while.
And you mentioned changes for future generations. Are there longer term changes that people are talking about for our region, or even looking to other places that have more extreme heat, that have made adaptations that we might need to pick up for ourselves?
I think so. I think there's a lot of changes in store. The bottom line is that heat can be deadly, and it is deadly. It's killed people in our region, and it, will continue to do so unless we do something. And so I think there'll be a lot of shifts. There's been other parts of the country where school has started later. So we may shift the school year. We may have to change when outdoor workers do their work. So, it may be that during the summer, nobody's going to be repairing roofs anymore because it's just going to be too darn hot. We might have to change how we grow our crops because farm workers are not going to be able to work past certain temperatures. There's all these sort of micro shifts. We may have to move to the coast, or have some sort of refuge at the coast where people can go when it gets really hot elsewhere. And I'm sure there's going to be thousands of people going to the coast next week or this weekend. So, it's just lots of changes in how we do everything, because the reality is that, we don't have cooling systems everywhere. Not every school has an AC at this point. There's just a lot of places that are still very hot, and a lot of houses that are still very hot. We have to, weatherize houses, insulate houses, install, full cooling systems in everybody's house, basically. But that is extremely expensive. And even though the Clean Energy Fund is trying to do some of that, it can only do a few thousand houses. And, what about the rest? I mean, there's a lot of lower income people and even middle income people who can't afford to fully insulate their house and, fully weatherize their house because it's expensive. So, there's a lot of changes that we need to make to adapt to these future extreme temperatures. And I think I should add that there is a lot of federal incentives right now and tax credits for folks who are able to afford, making some of these changes, adding a heat pump, insulating their home, changing out the old windows. There's a lot of help, financial help out there. So for those, middle income folks who have a little bit of extra income, or just feel like this is a good investment, it may be worth checking out those federal credits and other subsidies and state ones as well.
Well, thank you, Gosia, for coming back on Beat Check.
You're welcome.
And thank you to our listeners for making Beat Check with the Oregonian part of your routine. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. You can also spread the word by telling a friend. The best way to support journalism like this is with a subscription to the Oregonian or Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Talk to you next time.